first two verses. Verse 1. There was a Benjaminite, a man of standing, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, son of Zerah, son of Bechorath, son of Aphiah, a Benjamin. Kish had a son named Saul. As a handsome young man as could be found anywhere in Israel. That's some statement. That is some statement. And he was head and tall than anyone else. So what do we get from these two verses? We learn, first of all, that Saul's family, they were well-to-do. They were a well-to-do family. Kish was Saul's father. And it appears that Kish was a wealthy man, or at least a man in standing. I suppose this is politically incorrect now, but when I was a boy, you'd hear this statement very often. Oh, he comes from good stock. He comes from good stock. And you could say that about Saul. He comes from good stock. So that's the first thing we find out about him. He comes from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, the Apostle Paul came from the tribe of Benjamin. And we read in Romans chapter 11, verse 1, Paul said that it was an honor to be or come from the tribe of Benjamin. And that's what the Apostle Paul said. And so it was an honor for Saul to come from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, the tribe of Benjamin, we'll learn about this as we go along. But if you know anything about the Bible, you know about this anyway. Was small. It was the smallest tribe in all the tribes of Israel. And one of the reasons for that was there was a great problem. And we're not going to look into that. And it's a horrendous story. When I read this story, first of all, I must have been about 12. It shocked me. It really did shock me. But this is a dreadful story, and it's in Judges, and it starts Judges chapter 19 and Judges carrying on, I think, to 21. But it's a dreadful story. But the gist of it was, a dreadful act was taken place, and the whole of the tribes of Israel were angry because this act was done by a Benjaminite, and they fought against Benjamin. So there was almost, if you like, a civil war, if you can call it a civil war, but it was all of the tribes against Benjamin. And there was a great conflict. And it ended up that Benjamin was almost wiped out. And they sorted that out. But that's one of the reasons why the tribe of Benjamin was a small tribe, smaller than any of the other tribes. And we'll discover that, and we'll talk about that as we go on. Okay. So they were few in number regarding the rest of Israel. Now then, Kish, as we've said, was a mighty man, an important family, comes from good stock. So what about Saul? Now, the first thing we notice about Saul, which we don't notice on these verses, but I'm going to bring them in because we will notice them as we go through this section, is that he was a good man. He was a very good man. I think you'd call him the old-fashioned, an honorable man. He was a good man. We don't see that here in these verses, but we will see it as we go along. The other thing we learn is that he was a handsome man. He was a handsome man. And we also learn that he was taller than anybody else. You can see me there. So everybody else came to about that height. So it appears his head higher than everybody else. So if you were walking in the fields or in the village or even in the town, and you saw Saul walking along with his mates, with his friends, you would say, good gracious, who's that? He dwarfed everybody. And the girls would look and they would say, wow, what a dish. What a dish. And heads would turn, and probably his mates would be jealous. Why aren't I as handsome as this guy? Well, the heads would turn. The heads would turn. And there he was, an incredible specimen of a man. And you can see why God chose him, the perfect worldly king. This is what you expect of a king. Tall, strong, handsome, young man. This is what you expect of a war king, a fighting king, a king that will lead an army. So that's we learn about those two things, or those many things. But sadly, no mention at all, there's no mention of his wisdom. We don't hear anything of his wisdom. And I don't say he was, I think as we go through this, we discover, and I'm not being unkind, but he was not the brightest person. I think we can discover that. I don't mean that he was thick or anything like that. And I think we can see that in the things he said, but he wasn't the brightest person. And another thing we learn from this passage, no thought of religion. And as we get through this, we will discover that. No mention of his religious thoughts. He wasn't religious at all, it appears to be. Whereas David would be singing psalms to the Lord as he was looking after the sheep. No mention of his, and in actual fact, when we get through this story, we discover, I think, that his religious knowledge was very lacking indeed. So those are the things that we've learned from him from these two verses. So let's just carry on. Verse 3. Now the donkeys belonging to Saul's father, Kish, were lost. And Kish said to his son Saul, take one of the servants with you and go and look for the donkeys. So he passed, so off he went. He took the servant and he went off with these donkeys. And he passed through the hill country of Ephraim and through the area around Shalasha, but he did not find them. And they went into the district of Shalem, but the donkeys were not there. Then he passed through the territory of Benjamin, but they did not find them. So, what do we, these two verses here? The donkeys are lost. The donkeys are missing. And Saul has to take a servant with him to find these donkeys. And we find in verse 20 that actual fact, they were searching for these donkeys for 3 days. And they went through the territory of Ephraim and Benjamin, and they ended up in the land of Zuph. And that is important because Samuel is around there. Again, this is the providence, the divine providence of God. But their search was futile. And I thought about this. Let's think. I'm going to put a modern person's viewpoint on this. So please excuse me. But I think as we look through history, we discover that we're pretty well all the same anyway. We're all human beings, and we all have the same thoughts and feelings as our ancestors did. But you can just imagine this, and remember, this is in the providence of God. The donkeys are lost in the providence of God. And this is in the answer of the prayer that the children of Israel prayed for. And you can just imagine Saul, the father, Saul, the donkeys are lost. And Saul, oh no, the donkeys have gone. Oh, for goodness sake. Take a servant and see if you can find these donkeys. And so off he went, taking food, supplies, water. He took a servant, and he took a good servant. So I reckon he knew which servant to take. We'll see that later on. And off he went, searching for these donkeys. And presumably you take weapons as well, because it was a bit like the Wild and Woolly West. You didn't just go off and search. You had to be prepared, because there were bandits around and all sorts of undesirable people, to search for these donkeys. And they would go in the heat of the day. They would have to be cold at night around a little campfire. And you can just imagine him saying about maybe even cursing about these donkeys. Maybe you look as a human being would do. As we mentioned, there's very little religious knowledge in the man at this particular time, searching for these donkeys, but it was all in the providence of God. And when things don't go right for us, remember, it is in the providence of God very often. God is in control. God has a plan. And we need to remember that. And as Christians, when things don't go right, be careful that we don't, if you like, act like a worldly man or a worldly woman. But anyway, they search for these donkeys, and they don't find these donkeys at all. Their search is in vain. So we'll read now verses 5 to 10. Look at the time. We'll read verses 5 to 10. And when they reached the district of Zuph, Saul said to his servant who was with him, "Come, let's go back, or my father will stop thinking about the donkeys and start worrying about us." But the servant replied, "Look, in the town there is a man of God. He is highly respected, and everything he says comes true." And that's a hint who this man could be. Let's go there now. Perhaps he will tell us what way to take. And Saul said to his servants, "If we go, what can we give the man? The food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have?" And the servant answered him again. "Look," he said, "I have a quarter of a shekel of silver. I will give it to the man of God, so that he will tell us what way to take." And of course, the man of God did tell them what way to take, but it wasn't to find the donkeys. It was to find a kingdom that he never dreamed of. He never dreamed of. He sought the donkeys, but he found a kingdom that he never dreamed of. And then we have apparently a quarter of a shekel is about 1 shekel is about a quarter. I'll say that again. 1 shekel is a week's wages, but he had a quarter of a shekel. 1 shekel is a week's wages, or just over a week's wages. And then we have the history lesson in verse 9. Formerly in Israel, if someone went to inquire of God, they would say, "Come, let's go to the seer," because the prophet of today used to be called a seer. So that's where we get the word seer in verse 5. So that puts us in the picture. And then we go back to the story. "Good," Saul said to his servant, "come, let's go." So they set off for the town where the man of God was. Okay, I said in my introduction that Saul was a good man. And excuse me, I'll have to blow my nose. And here we have it. Here we have that he was a good man. We discover that they were there for 3 days. The food's gone. And they've not found these donkeys. And so Saul says, "Let's get back home." let's get back home. And he says, let's get back home because of his father. His father. He's worried about his father. He doesn't want his father to worry. He's got love and respect for his father. And that's the mark of a good man. That's the mark of a good woman. He's worried about his father. He says, I don't want father to worry. I don't want dad to worry. We've got to get back. And then when we get back, we can reprovision ourselves and try and search for them again if they haven't been found. Now, not all children are like that, sadly, are they? We hear stories of children that have no respect of their parents, sadly. They have no love for their mother or their father. All as they want is they want what they want. And that is a mark of not a good person at all. But Saul is not like that. Saul's an honorable man. He's got great respect for his father, great love for his father. And he doesn't want his father to worry. After all, we've been 3 days. I don't want dad to worry, to forget the donkeys. He'll start to worry about us. And notice too, he doesn't say worried about me. In verse 5, he says worried about us. And I think that shows something of Kish. He had great respect for Saul, his son, but he also had respect for the servants. Worried about us. Some people, some rich people, they're only worried about their own children, if you like, their own family. And they have no respect for the servants. But it appears that Kish was not like that from what we can see here. Also be worried about us. So that shows us, I think, that, and as we go through it, we will see that he is a good man. As I've said, when I think about Saul, I do feel sorry for him because this is answer to prayer for the children of Israel, and it was under judgment. And unfortunately, Saul was going to end up, I don't know, in a wrong position because of what they prayed for, and God was giving them what they prayed for under judgment. Okay, let's carry on. Now, so we learn that he's a good man, and we learn that he's ready to give up. We also learn that the servant is also a very, very good servant. It reminded me of Abraham's servant. Abraham's servant was a good servant. When Abraham sent him off to find his wife for Isaac. And this seems to be the same sort of servant. Is this why Saul chose him? Because he knew he could rely on him? He was a good servant. Lo and behold, and he's also a spiritual man, from what we can gather. He mentions about the man of God. There's a man of God here. And all that he says comes true. This man of God. And so again, a good servant. But Saul has no knowledge at all about this man of God. It appears to be. And I find that extraordinary, particularly in Israel at this particular time. It appears he has no knowledge at all of this man of God. But the servant does. So the servant comes up trumps. And then, of course, Saul then says, but, another but, negative waves. But what can we give him? We've got nothing. But the servant comes up trumps again. And he says, I've got 1/4 shekel of silver. We can give him. And so Saul said, a good idea. So off they go and find the man of God. And the man of God, we read, is Samuel, because all that he says comes true. June, can you get me some water, please? All that he says comes true. Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks. So where did I get to? And we read in chapter 3, verse 19, if you remember, that the Lord let none of his words fall to the ground. And the truth of a prophet is that what he says comes true. I look at YouTube a lot, and I look at some of the American evangelical Christians on YouTube, and the campaign of Trump and what have you, and they're most unhappy about the Trump loss. And when you read some of their prophecies, I have to laugh, although I'm quite sad at it. Oh, Trump's going to win and all the rest of it. And now Trump hasn't won, and they still claim to be prophets from God. And they're not prophets at all. They're not prophets. Because a true prophet, what he says comes true. All that he says comes true. That's a true prophet from God. And anybody who claims to be a true prophet of God are deceiving themselves. The Lord let none of his words fall to the ground. And it makes me angry. It makes me upset as well that some of these evangelical Christians in America go down this road, to be honest. Anyway, enough of that. That's bypass Meadows. Right, okay, so verse 11 to 14. And as they were going up to the hill, to the town, they met some young women coming out to draw water. And they asked them, "Is the seer here?" "He is," they answered. "He's ahead of you. Hurry now. He has just come to our town today, for the people have a sacrifice at the high place." As soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the high place. The people will not begin to eat until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice afterwards. Those who are invited will eat. Go up now. You should find him about this time. Notice that those that are invited will join the feast, will eat at the meal. Little did they realize that they were the ones that were going to be invited to the meal. And little did Saul realize that he was going to be at the top table. The servant was there as well. But little did the girls realize that this man was going to be eventually the king. And they went up to the town, and as they were entering it, there was Samuel coming towards them. Now we know this seer is. We know it's Samuel, and we would have known that anyway. What they said, that all that he says comes true. Coming towards them on their way up to the high place. So they were searching. So they went to the city, and they met these young women. And they tell me that it would be evening when this was taking place. And we're constantly saying this is in the providence of God. We see the plan here of God working it out. They landed up where Samuel was. That's where they ended up, where Samuel was. And the chances of that happening are nil, really, but that's where they landed up. And they met these girls, and they were collecting water. Now, it would be evening, as I say, because the idea was, don't forget, there was no running water. You couldn't put the tap and get water. You had to go to the well and get the water. And they would get the well, go to the well, get the water in the evening after all the work was done. And the idea was that you gather all the water you needed for the next day's work, whatever it was, cooking, cleaning, whatever it was, drinking, and you take it home, and then it was ready for the next day. Put it in a cool place. So when you got up in the morning, you hadn't got to go to the well. The water was there ready for you. So it was in the evening, and that's how it went. So a cycle, if you like. That's how it went. And then they would go after that day's work, they would go again in the evening to collect the water again. And obviously you didn't want to collect water in the heat of the day, particularly in Israel. They tell me it's a very, very hot, dry, humid place. We noticed that the sacrifice, and it was on a high place, this high place. Some people have suggested that because Samuel lived there, he could well have built this high place for the sacrifices. We also notice, or we can remind ourselves, that these high places of worship were built, but then they were removed. They were forbidden after the temple was built. When Solomon built the temple, these high places were removed and they were forbidden. You didn't use them anymore. We also need to be reminded, just briefly, 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 17, we noted before that Samuel was a Levite and has some kind of oversight role here. And this is the reason why he was here. So he had the role. He wasn't actually a Levite. So verses 16 to 17. About this time tomorrow, and this now is God speaking to Samuel. This now is God speaking to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked upon my people, for their cry has reached me. And when Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, "This is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people." Okay, so there's a sacrifice on the high place, and Samuel is there to bless this sacrifice. And God tells Samuel in an extraordinary revelation the day before about Saul and about the fact that he must anoint this man to be prince over Israel. And this man, Saul, is head and shoulders above everybody else. And this man is a handsome looking chap. And I would imagine that as soon as Samuel saw him, God said, "This is the man." And Samuel would not be surprised. The ideal specimen to be a king. And I do wonder if you remember in the future, when he's there, goes and he anoints David as king, as the prince, as king, to take over from Saul. And he does it secretly, if you remember. I wonder if he thought back at Saul and the sad state of affairs. Was going to started so well. And if you remember, when Samuel looked at Jesse's sons, and he said, the first one, and he said, "Surely the Lord's anointed." And I think to myself, was he thinking back at this time when he first saw Saul, this handsome, very tall young man? Was he thinking back? And the Lord said, "No, don't look at his stature. Don't look at his looks. He's not the man. He's not the man." I just think, did he look back at this particular time, this time with great promise, this time that started so well and ended so badly? A thought here also is that eventually God, and I find this strange, but when he was anointed with oil, and we look, and that will happen in chapter 10, when he's anointed with oil, eventually the Spirit of God falls on Saul. But then the Spirit of God, after his disobedience, is removed from him. And I thought about that. God opens the eyes and he unstops the ears and he removes the veil from the heart. And here he did it with Saul. As we've said, Saul had very little spiritual knowledge, really. It appears to be. Didn't even know who, it appears he didn't even know who Samuel was. It's strange. But then he's anointed with this oil, and the Lord, if you like, puts his Holy Spirit upon him. But then it is removed later on because of disobedience. Thank God that when God has chosen us, when our eyes are uncovered, that he doesn't remove when we fall, when we do all sorts of things, when we behave not like Christians should behave. Thank God that he doesn't remove his spirit from us. Thank God that that our salvation is sure and true. Thank God that our names are written in the palms of his hands. Oh, we need to thank God for that Jesus came and died on the cross to pay the price for our sins. But that's a thought about Saul here. The fact started so well. And as I say, I find this story of Saul, and I always have done, quite distressing, really. I really do find it so distressing because he was a good man. He was a good man. And he started so well. And we also look, although this was the judgment of God upon the children of Israel, we also can see in this the amazing love, the amazing steadfast love of God towards us, and also towards the children of Israel. We read in verse 16, to anoint ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked upon my people, for their cry reaches me. How kind God is. God hears our cry. And sometimes we think that he doesn't, but he does hear our cry. It's amazing. Despite their rejection of him, God is concerned about their well-being. And he raises up Saul to defeat the Philistines for them. And this is truly amazing. And we see here the truly steadfast love and the amazing love of God towards his people and towards us. And let us hold fast. We've come through a year. I'm going to end now. My voice is cracking up. We've reached verse 17. We've come to the end of a year that is a year that none of us have ever experienced, really. And the lockdown and the virus and all the rest of it. And we've had problems, some of us, with our families. And yet God is still in control. And it is all in some mysterious way in the providence of God, the divine providence of God. God is actually in control, and we must hold on to that fact. Even though we can't understand it, we must hold on to that fact. I have, and I'll just say this as we end, just some other thoughts as well, but just as we end, and we'll sing our final hymn. A distressing figure. I've had a distressing figure from Barnabas Front. 32,000 Nigerian Christians have been murdered since 2009. That's 10 years. That's 10 years. So by these Islamic extremists. And the world says nothing. The world says nothing. and our hearts go out and we say, Lord, how can this be? How can you be in control? How can you let this happen? And our faith sometimes shakes, to be honest with you. But hopefully this little talk has encouraged us to remember that God is in control, and it is all in divine providence. And God's purposes will happen. His kingdom will come, and his will be done. And we must be ready for when Jesus Christ comes again. One of the marks of the return of Christ is deception. And I think we can see that more and more in our day and in our generation. People being deceived, people believing lies. So let us hold on to the fact that God is in control. And as we've looked through this divine providence, and I'll just read that statement again I made. It's amazing that despite their rejection of God, God is concerned about their well-being and raised up Saul to defeat the Philistines for them. And this is another example of how God's love is truly steadfast and amazing. So hold on to God's love. God will work things out for you. It may not be in this next year, but hold on. So I'll just finish in a prayer, and then we'll sing our final hymn, and then we'll do communion.